Oh my goodness, it's a great question because you would probably get just a handful of people that would be on that list.
What if the kindest man in country music was secretly keeping a list? At 68, Vince Gill, Nashville's soft-spoken legend, finally reveals the 7 artists he couldn't stand, and the reasons will shake your view of country music forever. From silent feuds to shocking snubs, this isn't just about rivalry, it's about the soul of an entire genre. Stick around, because the quietest voice might be the one that hits hardest. They called him country music's quiet soul, polished, kind, and endlessly talented. But what if behind that polished voice and soft smile was a storm that had been building for years? What if Vince Gill, the man who melted hearts with his lyrics, carried a private history marked not by accolades, but by silent disappointments and long memories? At 68, Vince has weathered the spotlight for decades, gliding through Nashville's competitive landscape with a voice like velvet and fingers that danced across strings with impossible grace. Fans saw a gentle craftsman, his peers admired a master, but close insiders whisper of a different Vince, one whose calm exterior masks an unshakable devotion to precision and a mind that never forgets a slight. They say he has a list, not of enemies, but of moments, of turning points, of choices that haunted him in quiet rooms. Every legend has a beginning. Vince's roots trace back to Norman, Oklahoma, where structure ruled the Gill household. His father, a no-nonsense federal judge who moonlighted as a musician, set the tone. Music wasn't handed to Vince on a silver platter. It was a battlefield. He honed his talent the gritty way, failing repeatedly, perfecting relentlessly, and hauling amplifiers from town to town in search of a break. He slept in vans, scraped through bar gigs, and played for little more than applause and a sandwich. It wasn't glamour, it was grit. Eventually, opportunity knocked through Pure Prairie League, and from there, Vince's star began its ascent. With each note, he carved out a space for heartfelt lyrics and subtle musicianship. But just as he found his rhythm, the country scene began to drift. The genre he gave everything to was being remodeled before his eyes, not with care, but with glitter and neon. Country's raw soul was being polished into something shinier, louder, and emptier. He didn't speak out publicly, not yet, but he watched, and he remembered. Then came the so-called list, a whispered collection of names and moments that, insiders say, altered Vince's path forever. One of the first, Garth Brooks, the megastar who took country from intimate ballads to stadium explosions. With headset microphones, pyrotechnics, and flying stunts, Garth didn't just change the rules, he rewrote the entire game. To many, he was a revolution. But to Vince, the transformation felt like a betrayal. Vince, the purist who prized lyric over lights, couldn't relate to this new wave. He didn't despise Garth. He mourned what was being lost. The rumor mill spun when whispers of a rejected duet surfaced in the early 2000s. Garth extended the invitation. Vince, allegedly, declined. Not because of ego or schedule, but because deep down he couldn't bring himself to lend his voice to a sound he no longer recognized as his own. In a world tilting toward spectacle, Vince didn't want to become another supporting act in a show that no longer told stories. And that was just the first chapter. There's something haunting about an artist watching his genre morph into something he no longer recognizes. Vince stood on the sidelines as others climbed the charts with choreographed routines and radio-friendly hooks. He stayed true to the raw, heartfelt storytelling that had built the genre, but found himself increasingly out of step with the direction the industry was sprinting toward. What do you do when your authenticity begins to feel outdated? When your deepest artistic beliefs clash with the system that once celebrated you? That conflict between purity and popularity, between artistry and commerce, etched itself into Vince's path. Friends say he would sometimes go quiet in green rooms, that behind the affable charm was a mind always assessing, always calculating, not out of malice, but from heartbreak. Despite this inner tug-of-war, Vince never lashed out publicly. Instead, he built his legacy one song at a time, letting his guitar and lyrics speak louder than any headlines. He refused to chase fads. He chose integrity, even when the cost was silence in an arena where louder voices won the spotlight. And yet, the weight of watching others dilute the music he loved took a toll. Insiders say Vince became more selective, more guarded. The collaborations he turned down weren't just about time. They were statements, quiet protests, personal lines drawn in the sand. Behind every standing ovation he received was a decision not to compromise. Behind every Grammy, a choice to walk away from paths that promised more fame but less heart. In a town where reinvention was the currency, Vince stayed who he was. And that perhaps made him more radical than any costume change ever could. Even now, with decades behind him and halls of fame echoing his name, there's still a sense that Vince is watching, listening, remembering, because legends aren't just made by the songs they write, but by the battles they fight in silence. And Vince Gill? He's been fighting for the soul of country music, one quiet, unforgettable moment at a time. There's a reason Vince Gill always played with intent. Every note, every lyric, every decision was rooted in something deeper than fame. And while many artists drifted with the winds of popularity, Vince held his ground, quietly drawing lines in the sand that only the keenest observers could see. Behind his gentlemanly image was a man unwilling to compromise the art he believed in, no matter who stood across from him. Kris Kristofferson, the renegade poet of country music, had a voice that cracked and lyrics that cut deep. To many, he was brilliance cloaked in rebellion. But Vince saw a different reflection. To him, Kristofferson's rawness felt less like soul and more like recklessness. Vince, the craftsman of clean harmonies and refined structure, couldn't find common ground in the chaos. The tension was never aired publicly. But when tributes rolled out or legends were named, Kristofferson's name was always absent from Vince's mouth. Silence, in this case, was louder than any feud. It wasn't hatred, it was a fundamental divide in philosophy. Vince sought clarity. Kris thrived in the storm. Then came the seismic arrival of Billy Ray Cyrus. A single song, Achy Breaky Heart, turned Billy Ray into a household name overnight. Fans danced, TV shows parodied, the world couldn't get enough. But Vince? He watched in disbelief. To him, it was the day substance lost a battle to spectacle. In private circles, he once joked that the track felt like a karaoke machine wearing cowboy boots. That wasn't storytelling. It was selling noise. The two men never shared a stage, never swapped compliments, and never walked the same red carpets. Vince kept building legacy. Billy Ray chased lightning. And in that chase, a silent rivalry sparked into permanence. But it wasn't just about the performers. It was about the direction they were pulling country music toward. When Shania Twain burst onto the scene, her style was magnetic, glamorous, bold, and undeniably successful. She didn't just break records, she rewrote the rules. Millions adored her. But Vince? He stood still while the genre he cherished sprinted toward pop-infused horizons. There were no interviews where he critiqued her, no public digs. But the absence of celebration was its own kind of message. No duets, no tribute appearances, just a void where a nod might have been. Vince wasn't threatened by Shania. He was disappointed by what her rise represented. A genre that once whispered hard truths now glittered with chart-chasing hooks. Sometimes, what's unsaid is more powerful than any argument. And then came Jason Aldean, a new breed of star. Trucks, parties, red solo cups. His lyrics built worlds of weekend escapism, and fans showed up by the thousands. Vince watched the bro country movement unfold with quiet discomfort. To him, country was born in the ache, the longing, the grit of everyday life. It wasn't supposed to sound like a Saturday night out. It was meant to feel like a letter home. He never bashed Aldean, never called out names, but you'd never see him hand over an award or appear on a shared lineup. He skipped the festivals where Aldean was the headliner. His absence wasn't out of protest. performances, and a legacy sculpted with integrity. You could say Vince Gill was the man who stayed behind while everyone else ran forward. But sometimes staying behind means you're holding the door open for those still finding their way back. Even now, in an era of viral hits and genre-blending trends, Vince remains a symbol of what country once was and what it should never forget. His quiet decisions, who he chose not to sing with, who he chose not to praise, weren't signs of resentment. They were acts of loyalty, not to people, but to music itself. And through it all, he never raised his voice. He never needed to, because some artists carved their legacy with anthems, while others shaped theirs with silence. Vince Gill, he's been doing both all along. It seemed improbable. Kanye West, a force of hip-hop and fashion, ever brushing against the quiet world of Vince Gill. But Vince didn't need to name him to make a point. In his rare interviews, he'd speak of artists who thrived on spectacle, who wore ego like a crown and treated melody like background noise. When Kanye called himself the greatest artist alive, the industry buzzed. Vince? He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. One man built temples of chaos, the other bowed to the discipline of craft. And in that unspoken contrast, Vince issued his verdict, not in words, but in absence. Travis Tritt, however, came from closer quarters, two 90s icons forged in the same golden fire of Nashville's resurgence. But where Vince moved with finesse and restraint, Travis powered through with grit and a louder growl. They shared stages once, even smiled for photos, but that warmth cooled quickly. At a benefit concert, Vince reportedly made a passing jab about some outlaws not being able to string together a decent verse. Backstage tension reportedly followed. No punches, no press, just a quiet wall that grew higher with every year. They were both cut from country's original cloth, but tailored differently. One sought harmony, the other firepower. This isn't a roll call of grudges, it's a chronicle of artistic heartbreak. Vince Gill didn't stand apart out of pride. He stepped back out of sorrow. Each name he never said, every song he refused to sing was a mournful goodbye to the version of country he believed in. A genre where lyrics healed and instruments whispered truth. While chart toppers leaned into reinvention, Vince buried himself in studios, reworking verses until they ached with honesty. He'd cancel appearances without drama, decline collaborations without comment. He didn't need to start a fight. His protest was silence, an invisible shield between himself and the noise. And as new stars emerged with million-dollar light shows and hashtags for fans, Vince became something rare. Over the years, he's collected a few automotive gems too, like a meticulously restored 1962 Corvette and a Bentley Continental GT for longer drives. His timepieces include a Patek Philippe Calatrava and a classic Rolex Submariner. He once owned a sleek private jet for touring during his peak years, later opting to co-own a modest charter setup with fellow artists. Real estate investments in Nashville and Colorado remain stable. Vince also supported startup ventures in guitar tech and boutique vinyl pressing. His insurance portfolio includes comprehensive career protection policies, health cover from his early days, and valuable asset insurance for instruments and property. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Build slow, insure smart, spend on what sings to your soul, not what shouts to the world. Looking back, the Vince we see today is a man unbent by pressure, unchanged by trends. The kid from Oklahoma who once hauled his guitar through smoky bars is now a quiet monument in country music's shifting landscape. He didn't chase relevance, he waited for it to find him again. Kanye's declarations may echo in headlines, Aldean's beats may shake stadiums, and Shania's sparkle may continue dazzling, but Vince Gill's power lives in the spaces in between. The pause before the chorus, the breath before the bridge. That's where he lingers. Not forgotten, just watching. And now, decades into a career carved with patience, the world is beginning to understand the weight of what he carried. Not bitterness, not jealousy, just a longing for something pure, something real. A song that could stand without stage tricks or shout-alongs. Something like the truth. It's fitting, then, that Vince never had a dramatic final act. He didn't burn out or fade away. He simply kept playing, kept writing, kept believing. Even as he declined award show invites or quietly slipped out of major tours, fans never stopped listening. And artists? they never stopped learning. Because Vince Gill didn't just write country songs, he lived one. And sometimes, the quietest voices echo the longest. So what do we really know about Vince Gill? On the surface, he's the gentle legend with a voice like velvet and a guitar that sings in harmony with the heart. But dig a little deeper, and we find a man who stood firm while the world around him spun faster, louder, and more chaotic. He didn't slam doors or shout from rooftops, he simply chose silence. But that silence, it spoke volumes. He wasn't trying to burn bridges, he was trying to preserve the foundation. While others leaned into flash, fame, and fanfare, Vince stood his ground with quiet resistance. And that list, the one no one saw coming, wasn't written in anger. It was born out of heartbreak. It was a love letter to a genre he saw drifting away, one decision at a time. From Garth Brooks' stadium spectacle to Shania Twain's pop revolution, and even the bro country wave led by Jason Aldean, each artist on Vince's unspoken list represented a shift in values. Not bad, just different. But for Vince, that difference mattered. It meant the difference between a show and a story, between performance and poetry. We saw how he never called them out, never made headlines. He didn't fight with tweets or interviews. He fought with restraint. He honored his heroes. He stayed in the studio. He let the music do the talking. And let's not forget, even legends like Chris Christopherson and Travis Tritt, icons in their own right, found themselves drifting from Vince's world. Not because they lacked talent, but because they didn't share his compass. Vince's journey wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the one who refused to let the roots rot. His success wasn't sudden, it was earned. And that's the greatest lesson. Longevity over popularity, depth over volume. So if you made it this far, tell us, which moment surprised you the most? Was it the quiet feud with Billy Ray? The philosophical divide with Shania? Or maybe that unspoken boundary with Kanye? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing your take. If you enjoyed peeling back the layers on one of country music's most complex figures, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. It really helps us keep telling the stories that matter. And hey, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more untold truths, behind-the-scenes drama, and emotional journeys from the world of music and fame coming your way.